What would you do if you saw a glimmer of the impossible in the darkest of places? Would you dismiss it, or would you step out into the rain? Inside a luxurious limousine, trapped in the suffocating embrace of evening traffic, sat a man who had everything money could buy and nothing his heart needed. His name was Alistair Blackwood, a billionaire whose wealth was matched only by the emptiness that consumed him from within. The rain hammered against the tinted windows of his vehicle, each drop a tiny explosion against the glass, creating rivers that distorted the world outside into abstract patterns of light and shadow. Alistair stared through those rain-streaked windows with eyes that had forgotten how to truly see. His reflection gazed back at him, a ghost of a man in an expensive suit, hollow cheeks, dark circles beneath distant eyes. He was 48 years old, but felt ancient, as though the weight of decades had pressed down upon his shoulders until his very soul had been crushed into something hard and cold and unfeeling. The traffic barely moved. Red taillights stretched endlessly before him, a river of frustrated humanity going nowhere. His driver, a silent professional who had learned long ago not to attempt conversation, sat motionless behind the wheel. The only sound was the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers and the muffled drumming of rain on metal and glass. Then Alistair's eyes caught something that shouldn't have been there, something impossible. In a dark alley between two towering buildings, barely visible through the downpour, sat a figure, a homeless man from what Alistair could discern, hunched against the brick wall, rain soaking through tattered clothes. But that wasn't what made Alistair lean forward, pressing his hand against the cold window. The man was glowing, not with the harsh glare of neon or the stark brightness of streetlights, but with a soft, warm radiance that seemed to emanate from within him, like a candle flame that the rain could not extinguish. The light was gentle, golden, impossibly serene in the midst of the storm. It shouldn't have been visible from this distance, shouldn't have been able to penetrate the rain and darkness, and yet Alistair saw it as clearly as if it were calling to him. The homeless man looked up. Through sheets of falling rain, across lanes of traffic, their eyes met. The man's face held an expression of profound peace and something else, recognition, as if he had been waiting for Alistair, as if this moment had been ordained long before either of them had arrived at this place. Alistair felt something stir within him, something he had buried so deeply he had forgotten it existed. Before he could think, before his rational mind could reassert control, he heard his own voice cutting through the silence. "Stop the car." His driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, uncertain. "Sir, stop the car, now." The limousine pulled to the side, hazard lights blinking. Alistair didn't wait for his driver to open the door. He pushed it open himself, and the rain immediately assaulted him, cold and unforgiving. Within seconds, his expensive suit was soaked through, his perfectly styled hair plastered to his skull. He didn't care. His feet carried him across the sidewalk, toward the alley, toward the light. What would you do if you saw a glimmer of the impossible? Would you dismiss it, or would you step out into the rain? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and tell us which city you're watching from. And if you believe that hope can be found in the most unexpected places, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next. The alley was darker up close, the buildings on either side blocking what little light the overcast sky provided. Puddles reflected the glow of distant streetlights. The smell of wet concrete and decay filled Alistair's nostrils, and there, against the wall, sat the man. Up close, the glow was even more remarkable. It wasn't blinding, didn't hurt to look at. Instead, it felt warm, welcoming, like standing near a fireplace on a winter evening. The man himself appeared to be in his 70s, with a weathered face framed by a wild grey beard. His clothes were threadbare and soaked, but his eyes were bright and clear, holding a depth of wisdom that seemed utterly at odds with his circumstances. "Hello, son," the man said, his voice soft but steady. He smiled, and the expression transformed his face from that of a suffering street dweller into something almost beatific. Alistair stood there, water dripping from his clothes, suddenly uncertain why he had come. His hand moved automatically to his inner jacket pocket, where he kept his wallet. Money. That was the answer. Money was always the answer. He could give this man money and return to his car and his life, and forget this strange moment. He pulled out his wallet, extracted a thick wad of $100 bills and held them out. "Here, take this." The man looked at the money, then back at Alistair's face, and gently shook his head. "I don't need that, son, but you look like you're carrying something heavy." The words struck Alistair like a physical blow. His hand, still holding the money, trembled slightly. "I'm offering you help," he said, his voice harder than he intended. Most people would be grateful. Most people would, the man agreed. But gratitude for money is a shallow thing, and what you're really trying to do isn't help me. You're trying to help yourself, trying to buy your way out of whatever made you step out of that fancy car. Alistair should have left, should have turned on his heel and walked away from this presumptuous stranger, but he didn't. Instead, he found himself lowering the money, found his legs folding beneath him until he was sitting on the wet ground beside the man, beneath a small awning that provided meager shelter from the downpour. "Who are you?" Alistair asked. "My name is Thomas," the man said. "And you're Alistair. I know. You don't need to ask how I know. Some things are simply known." They sat in silence for a moment, the rain creating a curtain that separated them from the rest of the world. Alistair studied Thomas more closely. The glow seemed to pulse gently like breathing, and now that he was this close, Alistair noticed something else. Despite sitting on cold, wet concrete in soaked clothing, Thomas didn't shiver, didn't show any sign of discomfort. He sat with perfect serenity, as though this alley were a palace and the rain a blessing. "Tell me about the stars you used to watch," Thomas said suddenly. Alistair's head snapped toward him. "What? The stars? When you were young, you used to watch them, didn't you? Tell me about that." How could this man know? Alistair hadn't thought about those nights in years, had actively suppressed the memories, but now, unbidden, they flooded back. Lying in the backyard of his childhood home on warm summer nights, grass beneath his back, the vast expanse of the universe spread above him, and beside him, always beside him, his younger brother David. "My brother and I," Alistair heard himself say, the words coming without his permission. "We would lie in the backyard and look at the stars. We'd make up stories about exploring space, discovering new worlds. David wanted to be an astronaut. He'd spend hours memorizing constellations, reading everything he could about space travel." "He sounds like he was full of wonder," Thomas said gently. He was. Alistair's throat tightened. He saw magic in everything, even in things that were right in front of us every day. A puddle after rain would be an ocean to him. A tree would be an entire forest. He had this ability to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. "And you?" Thomas asked. "What did you see?" "I saw reality," Alistair said bitterly. "I saw what things actually were. Someone had to be the practical one." Thunder rolled overhead, and lightning flashed, illuminating the alley in stark white light. In that instant, Alistair saw something that made his blood run cold. The lightning cast their shadows on the brick wall behind them, sharp and clear. But Thomas's shadow wasn't the shape of an elderly man. It was the silhouette of a young boy, small and slight, with the proportions of a child no more than 10 years old. The lightning faded, plunging them back into gloom. Alistair blinked rapidly, heart pounding. "Did you see that?" "See what, son?" "Your shadow. It wasn't. It didn't look like you." Thomas smiled that peaceful smile again. "Shadows are strange things. They show what's there, but also what we need to see. What did my shadow look like to you?" Alistair couldn't answer. His mind was reeling, trying to rationalize what he had witnessed. A trick of the light, an optical illusion caused by the angle of the lightning. His imagination, influenced by the conversation about David. There had to be a logical explanation. "I should go," Alistair said, starting to rise. I don't know what this is." "Before you do," Thomas said, reaching out and gently touching Alistair's arm, "remember this. Don't let the rain wash away the memories you should be holding on to." The touch was warm, impossibly warm given the cold and wet. Alistair looked down at where Thomas's hand rested on his sleeve, saw the glow intensify slightly, felt heat spreading through his arm into his chest. When he looked back at Thomas's face, those clear eyes seemed to look straight through him, past all his defenses, into the wounded place he had locked away 20 years ago. Alistair pulled away and stood, nearly stumbling on the slick pavement. "I have to go. You know where to find me if you need to," Thomas said calmly, as though Alistair's panic were perfectly understandable and completely expected. Alistair walked quickly back to his limousine, the rain beating down on him. His driver opened the door, concern visible on his usually impassive face. "Are you all right, Mr. Blackwood?" "Just drive," Alistair said, collapsing into the leather seat. "Take me home." As the car pulled away from the curb, Alistair looked back at the alley. Thomas sat exactly as before, that impossible glow surrounding him, watching the limousine depart. Even as the distance grew, Alistair could still see that light, a beacon in the darkness. "Don't let the rain wash away the memories you should be holding on to." The words echoed in Alistair's mind for the rest of the drive, through the elevator ride to his penthouse, as he stripped off his soaked clothes and stood under a hot shower trying to make sense of what had happened. He was a rational man, a businessman who dealt in facts and figures and concrete realities. Glowing homeless men didn't exist. Shadows didn't transform into different shapes. And strangers certainly couldn't know intimate details about his childhood. It had to be a coincidence. The man had made a lucky guess. The shadow had been a trick of the light. The glow was, what? A reflective material in his clothes. Some kind of bioluminescent bacteria. There had to be an explanation. Alistair dried himself off and dressed in comfortable clothes, then poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. The rain had intensified, turning the urban landscape into a blur of lights and motion. Somewhere down there, in that maze of streets and buildings, Thomas sat in his alley, glowing softly in the storm. The anniversary was in 3 days. 20 years since the day that had shattered Alistair's life into fragments he had never properly reassembled. 20 years since he had lost David. 20 years since he had failed in the one moment that mattered most. Every year when that date arrived, Alistair locked himself in his penthouse. He disconnected his phone, told his staff he was not to be disturbed under any circumstances, and spent the day systematically drinking himself into oblivion. It was the only way he knew to survive the crushing weight of guilt that descended upon him with the anniversary. His parents had tried to reach him on those days when he was younger. They had called, sent letters, even shown up at his door. But Alistair had refused all contact. He couldn't face them, couldn't look into their eyes and see the accusation he knew must be there, the unspoken truth that it was his fault their youngest son was gone. Eventually, they had stopped trying. The distance between them had grown from days to months to years. Now they were strangers connected only by blood and shared tragedy. Alistair had convinced himself this was for the best. His parents were better off without him. The world was better off without him. He existed as a ghost, going through the motions of life without actually living. But something had changed tonight. That encounter in the alley had cracked something open inside him, let light into a place that had been dark for 2 decades. Against his will, he was remembering not just the end, but the beginning. Not just the day David died, but all the days before, when his brother had been alive and laughing and full of impossible dreams. He remembered David at 6, insisting that the stars were actually holes in the sky where heaven's light shone through. At 8, declaring that when he became an astronaut, he would bring back a piece of a star for their mother. At 10, the age he would be forever, sitting by the lake behind their house, staring at the water's surface, fascinated by the way it reflected the sky. "It's like the universe goes on forever in both directions," David had said. "Up and down, sky and water. Which is the real one? Maybe they're both real. Maybe every reflection is just another version of the same beautiful thing." Alistair had rolled his eyes at his brother's philosophical musings. "It's just water, David, and those are just reflections. They're not real." "Maybe real isn't the only thing that matters," David had replied. Alistair set down his whiskey glass with a sharp click against the marble counter. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to stop the memories, but they kept coming. That day, that terrible day, the lake, the boat. The moment everything changed. He and David had taken out their small rowboat, something they had done hundreds of times. The water had been calm, the day perfect. David had been leaning over the side, trailing his fingers in the water, looking at the clouds reflected on the surface. And then he had seen it. A star. Somehow, impossibly, a single bright star visible in the daylight sky reflected on the water's surface. "Look!" David had shouted with excitement. "A star! In the daytime! I can reach it!" He had leaned farther out, arm extended toward the reflected point of light. The boat had tilted. Alistair had grabbed for him, had caught the back of his shirt. But the fabric had been wet, slippery. It had slid through his fingers. David had gone into the water with a splash. Alistair had jumped in immediately, had searched desperately, had screamed for help, but the lake, so calm on the surface, had currents beneath. By the time help arrived, by the time they found David, it was too late. His little brother, the boy who saw magic in everything, who wanted to reach the stars, was gone. "It wasn't your fault," people had told Alistair afterward. "It was an accident. You tried to save him. You did everything you could." But their words were meaningless. He had been there. He had been the older brother, the one responsible for keeping David safe, and he had failed. His fingers had not held tight enough. He had not been strong enough, fast enough, good enough. The guilt had consumed him. He had withdrawn from everyone and everything, built walls around himself, turned his heart to stone. He had thrown himself into business, into making money, into anything that would keep him from thinking, from feeling, from remembering. And it had worked, after a fashion. He had become successful beyond measure. He had also become hollow. Now standing in his penthouse with the city spread below him and the rain falling endlessly, Alistair felt those walls beginning to crack. Thomas's words kept echoing. Don't let the rain wash away the memories you should be holding on to. What did that mean? What memories should he be holding on to? All he had were memories of failure, of loss, of the moment his fingers let go. The next 2 days passed in a fog. Alistair went through his usual routine, attending meetings, making decisions that affected millions of dollars and thousands of employees. But his mind was elsewhere. At random moments, he would see that soft glow in his memory, would hear Thomas's voice asking about the stars, would remember the shadow that looked like a young boy. His secretary approached him on the second day with a message. "Mr. Blackwood, your parents called. They wanted to remind you that they'd like to see you this weekend. Your mother said it's important." Alistair's jaw tightened. The weekend, of course. They wanted to see him on the anniversary, wanted to share their grief, to try once again to bridge the chasm that separated them. "Tell them I'm busy. I have commitments." "Sir, your mother said to tell you that they're not getting any younger, and they miss their son, as if he deserved to be anyone's son, as if he hadn't failed in the most fundamental way. My answer is the same. Tell them I'm unavailable." That evening, Alistair stood in his living room holding a bottle of expensive scotch, preparing for his annual ritual of self-destruction. In 12 hours, it would be the anniversary. In 12 hours, he would begin the process of drinking himself into unconsciousness, of hiding from the world and his own thoughts. But this year felt different. This year, Thomas's words kept intruding. This year he kept seeing that glow, that shadow, kept feeling the warmth of that impossible touch on his arm. He looked out at the rain-swept city, at the thousands of lights blinking in the darkness, and somewhere down there, he knew, Thomas sat in his alley. Why couldn't Alistair stop thinking about him? Why did a chance encounter with a homeless stranger feel more significant than anything that had happened in the past 20 years? Don't let the rain wash away the memories you should be holding on to. Alistair set the bottle down. Before he could talk himself out of it, before his rational mind could reassert control, he grabbed his coat and left the penthouse. His doorman looked startled to see him at this hour, even more startled when Alistair walked past him into the rainy night, without explanation. The streets were quieter now, late evening sliding into night. Alistair walked with purpose, his feet carrying him through neighborhoods he never visited, toward the part of the city where his limousine had been stopped in traffic 2 nights ago. He wasn't sure he could find the exact alley, wasn't sure Thomas would still be there, but something pulled him forward with irresistible force. And then he saw it, the glow, softer now, dimmer than before, but still visible in the darkness. Alistair broke into a run, his shoes splashing through puddles, rain soaking through his coat. He turned into the alley and stopped. Thomas was there, but he looked different. The old man was curled against the wall, shivering despite the glow that surrounded him. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. The light that had seemed so warm and vibrant before was flickering, like a candle flame about to go out. "Thomas!" Alistair dropped to his knees beside the old man, hands hovering uncertainly. "Thomas, can you hear me?" The old man's eyes fluttered open. They focused on Alistair's face, and a weak smile crossed his lips. "You came back. I'm calling an ambulance." Alistair reached for his phone, but Thomas's hand, cold now, caught his wrist. "No time for that, son. This is how it has to be. This is why I was here." His voice was barely a whisper, each word an effort. "Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. I'll get you help. I'll get you to a hospital." "Always trying to save people," Thomas said, his smile growing sadder. "Always blaming yourself when you can't. Alistair, listen to me. Listen carefully, because I don't have much time." The glow was fading faster now, the light dimming with each breath Thomas took. Alistair shrugged out of his expensive coat and wrapped it around the old man's frail shoulders, trying to provide warmth, knowing somehow that it was futile. "I'm listening," Alistair said, his throat tight. Thomas's eyes, still bright despite the weakness of his body, locked onto Alistair's. "It wasn't your fault, Alistair." The words hit like a hammer to the chest. "You don't understand. You don't know what happened. I was reaching for the star I saw in the water," Thomas continued, his voice taking on a different quality, younger somehow. You tried to save me. You jumped in right away. You did everything you could. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we love someone, we can't change what's meant to happen. Alistair's heart stopped. Those words, that specific detail, the star in the water. He had never told anyone about that, had never spoken those words aloud. His parents didn't know. The police report hadn't mentioned it. It was a detail locked in his memory, in the last moment, before David fell. "How do you know that?" Alistair whispered, his hands trembling. Thomas's smile grew, warm and loving, and in that expression, Alistair saw something that made the world tilt beneath him. The old man's features seemed to shift, to become younger, to take on aspects that were achingly familiar. The eyes that looked at him were the same eyes that had gazed up at him from beside the lake 20 years ago. "Tell Mom I love her," Thomas said, his voice now unmistakably young, unmistakably David's voice. "Tell her I'm happy. Tell her and Dad that I'm with them always, in every star they see, in every reflection on the water. Tell them I'm proud of you, big brother. So proud of the man you could still become if you just forgive yourself." Tears were streaming down Alistair's face, mixing with the rain. "David, how is this possible? How?" "Love doesn't end," the voice said, still coming from Thomas's lips, but sounding more and more like the boy Alistair had lost. "It just changes form. I've been waiting for you, waiting for the right time to help you see. You've been so lost, Alistair, so trapped in guilt that wasn't yours to carry. I need you to let it go now. I need you to live again." "I can't," Alistair sobbed. "I let you go. I couldn't hold on." "You held on as long as you could. But Alistair, I was never meant to stay. My time was short, but it was beautiful. Every moment of it was beautiful because I had you and Mum and Dad, because I saw the magic in the world. Don't let my death steal that magic from you, too." The glow was almost gone now, just the faintest shimmer remaining around Thomas's form. Alistair clutched the old man's hands, feeling the warmth fading, feeling him slipping away again. "Don't go," Alistair pleaded. "Please don't go." "I'm not going anywhere," Thomas whispered, his voice fading. "I'm everywhere. In the stars you're afraid to look at, in the memories you're afraid to hold, in the love you're afraid to feel. Let me go, Alistair, not away from you. Let me go up. Let me go into the light where I belong, and you go forward into your life, the life you deserve to live." Thomas's eyes closed, that gentle smile still on his lips. The last flicker of light around him began to rise, lifting from his body like steam, like fireflies, like stardust. Alistair watched through his tears as the glow ascended, swirling in the rain, combining with the falling drops to create a moment of impossible beauty. The light spiraled upward, higher and higher, until it merged with the clouds and disappeared. Thomas's body dissolved into nothing, not a corpse, not remains, simply gone, leaving only Alistair kneeling in the rain holding his coat, with the warmth of that final touch still lingering on his hands. Alistair knelt there for a long time, rain pouring down around him, soaking through his clothes, washing over his face, mixing with the tears that wouldn't stop flowing. But these tears were different from the ones he had shed in secret for 20 years. These tears carried release, carried a burden that had finally been lifted. "It wasn't your fault." The words settled into his heart, into the place where guilt had lived for so long. They filled that hollow space with something he had forgotten how to feel: forgiveness, peace, hope. David had been there. David had returned, wearing the face of a homeless stranger, carrying a message of absolution that Alistair had needed more than air or water or any earthly thing. The miracle was not just in the encounter, but in the message itself. His brother had not come to accuse but to free him, had not come to condemn but to heal. Finally, Alistair stood. His legs were stiff, his body chilled to the bone, but he felt lighter than he had in 2 decades. The weight that had pressed down on him, the guilt that had colored every moment of every day was gone. In its place was something fragile, but growing stronger with each breath, a desire to live again, a desire to honor the gift he had been given. He looked up at the sky, at the clouds that hid the stars, and spoke aloud. "Thank you, David. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for forgiving me. I promise I won't waste this chance. I promise I'll live for both of us." The rain began to ease, the downpour softening to a gentle shower. Alistair walked out of the alley carrying his coat, feeling the rain on his face like a blessing. His feet carried him not toward his penthouse, but in a different direction, toward the suburbs, toward the house where his parents lived, the house he had not entered in 15 years. It was past midnight when he arrived. The house was dark except for a single light burning in the living room window. His parents always left a light on, he remembered, always kept a beacon burning in case their lost son found his way home. Alistair stood at the door, his hand raised to knock, and paused. What would he say? How could he explain where he had been, why he had stayed away, what had changed? Then he remembered David's words. "Tell Mom I love her. Tell them I'm proud of you." He knocked. Footsteps approached from inside, hesitant at first, then faster. The door opened, and there was his mother, older than he remembered, her hair more grey than brown, but her eyes the same eyes that had looked at him with love his entire life. Those eyes widened in shock, then filled with tears. Alistair! He couldn't speak, could only nod, and then she was pulling him inside, calling for his father, wrapping her arms around him as though he were still a child, as though no time had passed, as though he had never left. His father appeared, leaning on a cane Alistair didn't remember him needing before. The old man's face crumpled when he saw his son, and he moved forward as quickly as he could, joining the embrace, the three of them standing in the entryway, holding each other and crying. "I'm sorry," Alistair managed to say through his tears. "I'm so sorry for staying away. I'm sorry for everything." "You're here now," his mother said, her hands framing his face, looking at him as though she couldn't quite believe he was real. "That's all that matters. You're here." They moved to the living room, the same room where Alistair had played as a child, where David had built blanket forts and declared them to be spaceships. His parents sat on either side of him on the couch, neither willing to let go of him, as though afraid he might disappear if they stopped touching him. "I saw him," Alistair said finally. "I saw David." He expected skepticism, expected them to think grief or guilt had driven him to delusion. Instead, his mother simply squeezed his hand. "Tell us." So he did. He told them everything. The glowing man in the alley, the strange conversation, the shadow that looked like a young boy, the final encounter when Thomas had spoken with David's voice, had delivered David's message. His parents listened without interruption, tears flowing freely down their faces. When he finished, his father spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "We've felt him too, not like you did, but in small ways. A bird landing on the windowsill when we're thinking of him, a song on the radio that was his favorite, little signs that he's still with us. He wanted me to tell you," Alistair said, remembering every word of that final message, "that he loves you, that he's happy, that he's with you always in every star you see, in every reflection on the water." His mother let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "That sounds exactly like something David would say. He always saw poetry in everything." "He said he's proud of me," Alistair continued, his voice breaking. "He said he's proud of the man I could still become if I forgive myself." "Then you have to forgive yourself," his father said firmly. "For us, for David, but most importantly, for yourself. You've punished yourself long enough, son." They talked through the night, through tears and laughter, sharing memories of David that Alistair had locked away for so long. His mother showed him photographs he hadn't seen in years, David's bright smile captured in dozens of moments. His father told stories about his youngest son's questions about the universe, his insatiable curiosity, his unshakable belief that the world was full of wonders. As dawn broke, soft light filtering through the windows, Alistair felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. He felt like part of a family again. The distance that had separated them was closing, the wounds beginning to heal. It would take time, he knew. The years couldn't be erased in a single night, but the first steps had been taken, and the path forward was clear. In the days that followed, Alistair's life began to transform. He didn't return to his penthouse except to arrange its sale. The expensive furniture, the art, the trappings of his isolated existence, he sold it all or gave it away. He moved back into his parents' house, taking his old room, reconnecting with the place where he had grown up, where David's presence still lingered in every corner. He resigned from his position at his company, sold his shares, and liquidated his assets. His financial advisors thought he had lost his mind. His business associates couldn't understand what had happened to the cold, calculating man they had known. But Alistair didn't care what they thought. He had a new purpose, one that gave his life meaning for the first time in decades. He established the David's Light Foundation with a single goal to provide help, hope, and humanity to those who lived on the streets. But this wouldn't be another charity that handed out blankets and meals and called it compassion. This would be different. This would be revolutionary. Alistair poured his entire fortune into the project. He assembled a team of architects, social workers, psychologists, and spiritual counselors. Together, they designed shelters that were not warehouses for the desperate, but sanctuaries of dignity and healing. Each facility would be beautiful, filled with light and warmth, places where the homeless could not only find shelter but rediscover their humanity. The first David's Light shelter opened in the city, where Alistair had encountered Thomas, in a neighborhood not far from that alley where a glowing stranger had saved his life. It was a magnificent building, its architecture designed to inspire hope, with large windows that let in natural light, comfortable spaces that respected privacy, and communal areas that encouraged connection. But it was more than just a place to sleep. The David's Light Foundation provided comprehensive mental health services, addiction counseling, job training, and spiritual support for those who wanted it, regardless of faith or belief system. The staff was trained not just to provide services, but to see the humanity in every person who walked through their doors, to recognize that these were not problems to be solved, but people to be honored. On the day of the grand opening, Alistair stood before a crowd of donors, city officials, and media representatives. He was nervous, unused to speaking publicly about things that mattered to his heart rather than his wallet. But when he looked at the faces in the audience, when he thought about David and Thomas and the miracle that had brought him to this moment, the words came easily. 20 years ago, he began, I lost my brother in a tragic accident. For 2 decades, I carried the weight of guilt and grief, convinced that I was responsible, convinced that I deserved to suffer. I became successful in business, but died in my soul. I had everything and nothing. He paused, looking at his parents in the front row, their faces shining with pride and love. Then 3 months ago, I met a homeless man in an alley during a rainstorm. He was glowing, not figuratively, literally glowing with a soft, warm light that shouldn't have been possible. I got out of my car and sat with him, and he spoke words that began to crack open the prison I had built around my heart. Alistair told the story then, the whole story, holding nothing back. He told them about Thomas, about the shadow that looked like a young boy, about the final encounter when his brother's voice had come from the old man's lips, delivering a message of forgiveness and love. He saw skepticism on some faces, belief on others, but it didn't matter what they thought. He knew what had happened. He had been there. That homeless man saved my life, Alistair continued, his voice growing stronger, not by pulling me from a burning building or pushing me out of the path of danger, but by showing me that I had been drowning in guilt, and that forgiveness was possible. He showed me that the people we dismiss, the people we walk past without seeing, sometimes carry within them the light we desperately need. He gestured to the building behind him, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun. This foundation exists because of that encounter. It exists because a glowing stranger in an alley reminded me that every person has infinite worth, that every soul deserves dignity and respect and love. The people who will walk through these doors are not statistics or problems. They are human beings, each with their own story, their own struggles, their own light waiting to be rekindled. Alistair's voice broke slightly, but he pushed forward. My brother David saw magic in everything. He believed the world was full of wonders. He died reaching for a star he saw reflected in the water. This foundation is my way of reaching for that same star, of trying to bring light into dark places, of honoring his memory by helping others find hope. He looked directly into the cameras, into the lens that would carry his words beyond this moment. If you're watching this and you're struggling, if you're lost or alone or convinced that you're beyond help, please know this. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You matter, and there are people who want to help you find your way back to the light. The ceremony concluded with the ribbon cutting, and the doors of David's Light opened for the first time. Alistair stood in the lobby as the first residents entered, watching their faces as they took in the beautiful space, the comfortable furniture, the artwork on the walls that spoke of dignity and worth. Many of them looked stunned, unable to believe that such a place existed for them. An elderly woman approached Alistair, her eyes red from crying. Is this real? She asked. Is this really for people like me? This is for people exactly like you, Alistair said gently. Welcome home. As more people entered, as staff members greeted them with warmth and respect, Alistair found himself looking around the lobby at what they had created. And then he saw it, mounted on the main wall in a place of honor. The photograph. It was large, nearly floor to ceiling, professionally printed but capturing a moment of raw authenticity. The image showed a dark city alley in the rain, puddles reflecting distant streetlights, brick walls gleaming with moisture. and in the center, barely visible but unmistakably there, was a soft, warm glow. Not a person, just light. Anonymous, universal, a beacon in the darkness. His mother came to stand beside him, looking up at the photograph. "It's perfect," she said softly. "David would love it." "I wanted people to see what I saw," Alistair explained. "Not Thomas specifically, not trying to prove anything, just that light in the darkness, that hope in the hopeless place. That's what this foundation is about." In the months that followed, the David's Light Foundation expanded rapidly. More shelters opened in cities across the country, then internationally. Each one followed the same principles: dignity, compassion, comprehensive care, and beautiful spaces that honored the humanity of every person who entered. The foundation didn't just provide beds and meals. It provided counseling, education, job placement, addiction recovery support, and spiritual guidance for those who sought it. But what truly set David's Light apart was the culture Alistair insisted upon. Every staff member, from the directors to the custodial workers, was trained to see the people they served not as clients or cases, but as fellow human beings, worthy of respect and love. The shelters had no cold institutional feel. They were warm, welcoming places where people could heal not just their circumstances, but their souls. Stories began to emerge from the shelters. A veteran who had been living under a bridge for 3 years found housing and reconnected with his estranged children. A woman who had been trapped in addiction for a decade got clean and became a counselor herself, helping others walk the path she had traveled. A young man who had aged out of foster care with nowhere to go found not just shelter, but mentors who helped him get into college. Each story was a small miracle. Each transformed life was an echo of the miracle that had transformed Alistair's own life in that rainy alley. He visited the shelters regularly, sitting with residents, listening to their stories, seeing in each face the reflection of Thomas, the reminder that divine love often wore unexpected faces. Alistair's relationship with his parents deepened and flourished. They had dinner together several times a week, went on trips together, made up for lost time with an urgency born from understanding how precious and fleeting life could be. His mother would often comment on how different he looked now, how the hardness had left his face, how his eyes were alive again. "You look like my son again," she told him one evening. "The boy I knew before the accident. David's death took both my sons from me that day, but I have you back now. That's the real miracle." On the anniversary of David's death, instead of locking himself away in isolated grief, Alistair spent the day at the first David's Light shelter, the one built in the city where everything had changed. He worked alongside the staff, served meals, talked with residents, and remembered his brother not with guilt, but with love. That evening, as the sun set, he walked to the alley where he had met Thomas. It looked different now, cleaner, less frightening in the fading light. Alistair stood where Thomas had sat, where his brother's voice had spoken forgiveness, where a glowing stranger had shattered his life of guilt and rebuilt it into something meaningful. "Thank you," Alistair said quietly to the empty air, to the memory, to his brother, to whatever force had orchestrated that impossible encounter. "Thank you for saving me." He felt warmth then, like a hand on his shoulder, like an embrace. The evening air seemed to shimmer slightly, and for just a moment, Alistair thought he saw it again. That soft, warm glow, gentle as candlelight, radiant as hope. It was there and then gone, but it left behind a feeling of profound peace. Alistair smiled, tears on his cheeks but joy in his heart. He was not alone. He had never been alone. David was with him, in every act of compassion, in every life transformed, in every light that pierced the darkness. Years passed. The David's Light Foundation grew into one of the most respected humanitarian organizations in the world. Tens of thousands of people had been helped, had found shelter and healing and hope. Other organizations studied their model, trying to replicate their success, and Alistair shared everything freely. This wasn't about building an empire. This was about spreading light. He never married, never had children of his own, but he had thousands of people who considered him family. Former residents who stayed in touch, who sent him photos of their new lives, their jobs, their own children. Staff members who had found their calling in this work. Donors who had been inspired by his story to redirect their own lives toward service. Alistair's parents aged gracefully, secure in the knowledge that both their sons had left marks of beauty on the world. His father passed first, peacefully in his sleep, and at the funeral, Alistair spoke of a man who had loved his sons unconditionally, who had never stopped hoping for reconciliation, who had always kept the light on. His mother lived several more years, long enough to see the 50th David's Light Shelter open, long enough to hold the hands of countless people her son had helped save, long enough to know that David's short life had sparked something eternal. On the day she died, Alistair sat by her bedside, holding her hand as her breathing grew shallow. Her eyes were closed, but she was smiling. "I see him," she whispered. "I see David. He's waiting for me. He's so bright, Alistair. So beautiful. Tell him I love him," Alistair said through his tears. "Tell him I kept my promise. Tell him I lived." "He knows," his mother said. "He's always known. He's so proud of you. We both are." Her last breath was soft, peaceful, and as it left her, Alistair saw something extraordinary. A soft glow seemed to rise from her body, gentle and warm, just like the light he had seen around Thomas all those years ago. It hovered for a moment, then drifted upward. And in that glow, just for an instant, Alistair saw two figures, a woman and a young boy, holding hands made of light, smiling at him with infinite love. Then they were gone, and he was alone with his mother's peaceful body, but his heart was full. They were together now, David and his parents. The family reunited in a place beyond pain, beyond guilt, beyond the limitations of earthly existence. Alistair continued the work for many more years. He grew old himself, his hair turning white, his body growing frail, but his spirit remained strong. He never forgot the night in the rain, the glowing stranger, the message of forgiveness that had changed everything. On his final visit to the first David's Light Shelter, when he was in his 80s and knew his own time was drawing near, he stood in the lobby before that massive photograph of the alley with its mysterious glow. New residents passed him, unaware that they were looking at the founder of the foundation that was sheltering them. He preferred it that way. This had never been about recognition or glory. It had been about honoring a miracle, about paying forward the grace he had been given. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, came to stand beside him. The child was there with his mother, who had just entered the shelter seeking help. The boy looked up at the photograph with wide eyes. "What is that light?" the boy asked. Alistair smiled down at him. "That's hope," he said simply. "That's what happens when love shines in dark places." "It's pretty," the boy said. "It looks like it would be warm." "It is," Alistair assured him. "Warmer than you can imagine." The boy's mother called, and he ran to her, leaving Alistair alone with his memories. He looked at the photograph one more time, at that soft glow in the darkness, and he felt it again. That warmth, that presence, that certainty that he had been touched by something divine. That night, Alistair died in his sleep, peacefully, a smile on his face. Those who found him said he looked younger than his years, as though some burden had been lifted away. In his hand was clutched a small photograph, worn from years of handling. It showed two boys lying on grass, looking up at a starry sky, their faces full of wonder and dreams. The funeral was attended by thousands, former residents, staff members, donors, people whose lives had been touched by the David's Light Foundation. They told stories of how Alistair had changed their lives, how his compassion had saved them, how his vision had given them hope when they had none. But the most moving moment came at the end of the service, when a homeless man stood up in the back of the church. He was elderly, with a weathered face and threadbare clothes, and many in the congregation looked at him with surprise, wondering how he had gotten in. "I didn't know Mr. Blackwood personally," the man said, his voice clear and strong, "but I wanted to come and say thank you. I stayed at one of his shelters last year. It saved my life, not just because it gave me a place to sleep, but because the people there treated me like I mattered. They saw me, really saw me, and that's when I understood what this whole thing was about." The man gestured around the church. Mr. Blackwood understood something that most people don't. He understood that we're all just walking each other home, that we're all carrying burdens, that we all need light in the darkness. He gave that light to me and to thousands of others, and now he's gone home himself, but the light he lit keeps burning. As the man sat down, several people in the congregation noticed something odd. For just a moment, as the sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, the man seemed to be surrounded by a soft, warm glow. People blinked, looked again, and saw only an ordinary elderly man in worn clothes, but they had seen it. That impossible light, that echo of the miracle that had started everything. After the funeral, the homeless man was nowhere to be found. Security footage showed him entering the church, but never showed him leaving. Some said it was a technical glitch, others said it was something more. But those who had been close to Alistair, who knew his story, who understood what had happened all those years ago in a rainy alley, They knew the truth. The circle had been completed. Alistair had been saved by a glowing stranger, had devoted his life to helping others, and had been honored in death by another mysterious figure who carried that same inexplicable light. The pattern repeated, the love circled, the divine manifested again in the most unexpected form. In the years after Alistair's death, the David's Light Foundation continued to grow and flourish. New leadership carried forward his vision with the same passion and dedication. More shelters opened. More lives were transformed. The photograph in each lobby remained the same. That dark alley, that mysterious glow, that beacon of hope in the darkness. And sometimes, late at night, staff members working alone in the shelters would report strange occurrences. A soft, warm light moving through the hallways, the feeling of a comforting presence near residents who were struggling, an inexplicable warmth in rooms that should have been cold. They would look around, see nothing concrete, but feel certain they were not alone. The residents noticed it too. People would report dreams of being visited by a kind, elderly man with a gentle smile, or a young boy with bright eyes, or a distinguished gentleman with white hair. The figures in these dreams would offer encouragement, speak words of hope, remind them that they mattered. Upon waking, these residents would feel renewed strength to face another day, to take another step toward healing. Were these visitations real or imagined, products of stress or manifestations of grace? The staff never tried to explain or rationalize. They simply accepted that the David's Light shelters were special places where the barrier between ordinary reality and divine mystery seemed a little thinner, where hope had substance and love had power. Stories spread about the foundation, about its remarkable success rate, about the healing that happened within its walls. Researchers came to study their methods, journalists came to write feature articles, and skeptics came to find rational explanations for the extraordinary outcomes. But what none of them could fully capture or explain was the intangible element that permeated every David's Light facility, that sense of sacred space, that feeling of being held by something larger than human compassion alone. Decades after Alistair's death, a documentary filmmaker decided to tell his story. She interviewed hundreds of people, gathered footage, and pieced together the remarkable journey of a man who had been transformed by an encounter with a glowing homeless stranger and had spent the rest of his life paying that miracle forward. The documentary included the story of that night in the rain, the impossible light, the shadow that looked like a young boy, the final message delivered in a dead brother's voice. Some viewers dismissed it as metaphor or mythology, others believed it completely, but what no one could dismiss was the evidence of lives changed, of hope restored, of love manifested in concrete action. Near the end of the documentary, the filmmaker included footage from security cameras at various David's Light shelters. The clips showed ordinary moments, staff members helping residents, people sharing meals, individuals sitting alone in quiet contemplation. But in several of the clips, if you looked carefully, you could see something unusual, a soft glow that moved through frame, that seemed to pause near people who were struggling, that left warmth in its wake. The filmmaker had no explanation for the anomaly. Technical experts examined the footage and found no evidence of tampering or equipment malfunction. The light was there, captured on multiple cameras, in multiple locations, over multiple years, soft, warm, and inexplicable. The documentary ended with footage of that first David's Light shelter, the one built in the city where everything had begun. The camera panned across the lobby, past residents finding hope, past staff members offering compassion, and finally came to rest on the massive photograph on the wall, that dark alley, that mysterious glow. And there, sitting on a bench beneath the photograph, was an elderly homeless man. He was looking up at the image with a peaceful smile, and around him was a soft, warm light that the camera captured perfectly. He seemed to sense the camera, turned his head slowly and looked directly into the lens. His eyes were bright and knowing, filled with infinite compassion. He winked, smiled wider, and the light around him intensified for just a moment, so bright that it overwhelmed the camera's sensor. When the exposure corrected, the bench was empty. The man was gone, but the warmth remained, and everyone who saw that footage felt it, felt the certainty that they had witnessed something beyond ordinary explanation. The documentary became one of the most watched films of its year. It inspired a new wave of humanitarian efforts, sparked conversations about how society treats its most vulnerable members, and reminded millions of people that miracles, real miracles, could still happen in the modern world. But perhaps the most profound impact was on individuals, people who had lost hope, who had given up on life, who had convinced themselves that they were beyond redemption. They watched Alistair's story and saw themselves. They saw a man crushed by guilt who had been saved by an encounter with grace. They saw a life transformed, not through superhuman effort, but through accepting forgiveness and extending compassion. Letters poured into the David's Light Foundation from people whose lives had been changed by learning Alistair's story. Say a businessman who had been contemplating ending his life instead sold his company and devoted himself to service. A woman estranged from her family for decades reached out and reconciled. A teenager struggling with guilt over a friend's death found the courage to forgive himself and live fully. Each letter was a small echo of the original miracle. Each transformed life was a continuation of what had begun that rainy night in a dark alley when a billionaire had stepped out of his limousine and encountered the impossible. The foundation established a tradition. Every year, on the anniversary of Alistair's encounter with Thomas, all the David's Light shelters held a ceremony of light. As darkness fell, staff and residents would gather in the lobbies. Someone would tell Alistair's story, the full story, holding nothing back. And then together they would light candles, hundreds of small flames, each one representing a life touched, a hope restored, a soul remembered. The lobbies would fill with warm, golden light, and people would stand together in silent acknowledgement that they were part of something larger than themselves, part of a legacy of love that stretched back to a moment of divine intervention and forward into an endless future. During one of these ceremonies, many years after Alistair's death, something extraordinary happened. At shelters across the country, across the world, people reported the same experience. As they stood with their candles, as the light filled the lobbies, they felt warmth that seemed to come from beyond the small flames. They felt presence, multiple presences, loving and supportive. And many independently, without any prior discussion, reported seeing 3 figures made of light standing among them. An elderly man with a kind smile, a young boy with bright, curious eyes, and a distinguished gentleman with white hair and tears of joy on his luminous face. The figures seemed to move among the gathered people, touching shoulders, offering silent blessings, radiating love. The visions lasted only moments, but they left behind an unmistakable certainty. Alistair, David, and Thomas, or perhaps something divine wearing their beloved forms, were still present in the work, still guiding, still blessing, still ensuring that the light continued to shine in dark places. The David's Light Foundation continues its work to this day, decades after its founding. It has helped millions of people find shelter, healing, and hope. It has changed laws, influenced policy, and transformed how society thinks about homelessness and human dignity. But at its heart, it remains what it has always been: one man's response to a miracle, one life changed by grace passing that grace forward in an endless chain of compassion. In every David's Light lobby, the photograph remains, that dark alley, that soft, warm glow, anonymous, universal, a reminder that the divine walks among us in unexpected forms, that help comes from unlikely places, that no one is ever truly alone or forgotten. And sometimes late at night, when the shelters are quiet and the residents are sleeping, if you stand in the lobby and look at that photograph long enough, you might see something remarkable. The light in the image seems to move, to pulse, to breathe. And if you're very quiet, if you're very open, you might feel warmth spreading through your chest, might hear a whisper in your heart. You matter. You are seen. You are loved. Don't let the rain wash away the memories you should be holding on to. Forgive yourself. Live fully. Pass the light forward. These are the echoes of hope, the reverberations of a miracle that happened in a rainy alley but continues to ripple outward through time and space, touching lives, transforming hearts, reminding us all that we are part of something beautiful and eternal. This is the story of how a homeless man who glowed softly in the rain shattered a billionaire with his last words and saved not just one man, but countless thousands through the legacy that followed. It is a story of guilt transformed into grace, of isolation transformed into connection, of death transformed into life. It is a reminder that forgiveness can come from the most unexpected places, that the divine often speaks through the forgotten, that the greatest act of healing is to turn our own pain into a source of comfort for others. So I ask you again, as I asked at the beginning, What would you do if you saw a glimmer of the impossible in the darkest of places? Would you dismiss it, or would you step out into the rain? Alistair chose to step out into the rain, and that choice changed everything. Not just for him, but for everyone he touched afterward, and for everyone they touched in an endless cascade of light spreading through darkness. The rain still falls on city streets, alleys still hold shadows, homeless men and women still sit forgotten by the rushing world. But now, because of Alistair's choice, because of David's message, because of Thomas's miraculous visitation, thousands of lights shine where there was once only darkness. Thousands of voices speak hope where there was once only despair. And somewhere in the mystery beyond our sight, 3 figures made of light watch over the work they inspired, smiling with infinite love, proud of what one encounter in the rain has become. This is their story, this is our story. This is the eternal story of how love never ends, but only changes form, and how the smallest act of compassion can echo through eternity. If you've been moved by this story, please let us know in the comments. Tell us which city you're watching from. Share your own experiences of hope found in unexpected places. And if you believe that miracles still happen, that love can transform even the darkest circumstances, please subscribe to our channel. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it today. Because every person who hears this story and chooses compassion over indifference, forgiveness over guilt, action over apathy, becomes part of the echo, part of the light, part of the miracle that continues to unfold. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And may you, like Alistair, have the courage to step out into the rain when you see that glimmer of the impossible. May you be the light that someone else desperately needs to see. The story ends here, but the legacy continues. In every act of kindness, in every moment of forgiveness, in every choice to see the humanity in others, the echoes of hope ripple outward, and the glow that began in a dark alley on a rainy night continues to shine, warming hearts and lighting the way home for all who have lost their path. This is the power of love. This is the promise of grace. This is the eternal truth that no darkness, no matter how deep, can overcome even the smallest light, when that light is fueled by compassion and faith. Go forth and be that light. And know that you are never alone in that calling, for the echoes of hope walk with you always.